Good morning and welcome to Tales Off the Holotables, the only Galaxy of Heroes content that'll teach you nothing about the game itself, but everything about the players that enjoy it and the creators that support it. Today I'm joined by Pico Burrito, co-host of the very recently sunsetted Holotable News Network. So, Pico, what I do is I talk way too much. I'm going to try right now to pause that before I go into my whole spiel and just ask how you're doing this morning.
I'm doing great. It's a little crazy kind of hearing the former co-host thing. That's still, I think, trying to sink in a little bit, that we aren't carrying around, but it's the right time. It was the right thing to do, and I have Wednesdays free now. That's an interesting interesting view. So
that is a nice way to look at it. It's like, wow, I have so much time on my hands. So to kind of just catch people up, I started Tales of the Holotables a little bit less than a year ago. Sarah was my first major guest, which brought me, I guess, into the stratosphere of people going like, oh, hey, he's doing this stuff now. And I went on to Three Scoundrels. You reached out to me afterwards. And I wouldn't say that we talk often, but we do, I'd say like once a month, we'll have like a conversation. And we've been meaning to do this particular episode for like 6 months. We've talked about it for a while. I recently did some sponsorship stuff that made me reach out and say, hey, I think this is the right time. We were supposed to do it last week. And then, all of the H&N stuff, we're like, hey, maybe we should wait.
Yeah.
So this is not a reactionary video, to anything that happened. This was already planned, but I do want to talk about that because I was watching the episode, and I usually do it on Spotify. But I was watching the episode, and there was just so many themes that resonated with me as you put it. I'm not in my 40s yet, but as a white guy with what is really is a podcast, right? And time management, and I don't have kids yet, but watching your kids grow up. If anyone that doesn't watch H&N, a lot of it is topical. But definitely that last episode, I feel like, is timeless.
Yeah, and it's funny. We do a Star Wars podcast, and I believe H&N is one of the longer lived ones outside of maybe Galaxy of Heroes. I'm sorry, not Galaxy of Heroes. John and Sean's show that now Galactic News Network. Thank you very much. And those guys have been going on for a long time. In fact, that was the first place that I ever kind of went on a show. But the game is part of our life, so we talked about it in the context of our life a lot. It's there was a recent episode where something came up, and I had this running joke where people ask a question that we literally had just answered on the show, and I respond back with like, tell me you haven't listened to the show without telling me you haven't listened to the show. And their response was, I didn't want to sit through 20 minutes of parenting advice. Like, well, there's 20 minutes of parenting advice because we're both parents, and it's a major part of our lives. And, the game kind of fits in from that side. So I think that also just speaks back to, I just had a conversation every other week for a couple of hours, and the game just happened to be a part of it. And I thought that's just what we did really, really well. To say it was unscripted is an understatement. Normally, I think our show notes were less than about 50 words for what that was, and a lot of times we had no idea where we're going to go from that standpoint. So I'll miss it, but as I said on the show, I'm excited for her in the direction that she's going in, and we'll kind of see where things go for myself and frankly, she and I think we're both half-heartedly making this joke about maybe just doing a show about nothing, but that may happen someday. So we don't really know.
I was listening to that and I was like, oh, actually, I might just listen because I'm not somebody that watches or listens to a lot of game news or content. I don't have time to sit down and watch videos. I prefer things to be in podcast form. I already know enough about the game. So I don't need to hear kits constantly. When I did the show with her originally, and I kind of dove into your content to get an idea of what it was about, it's really the only thing that I listen to religiously, or I guess used to listen to religiously. And it wasn't for kit reveals, and it wasn't for what was going on in the game. It was just listening to you guys as hosts and be like, oh, like I don't want to say they know what they're doing, because you obviously both went in blind and tried this, but it worked.
Yeah, and this is a weird way to describe, I think, at least the way that I approach it. And there's before I jump into that, one of the interesting things for me over the past week has been, and I say this a little bit tongue in cheek, of how much I was the third leg of kind of the Sarah universe, because there was a lot of, again, rightfully so. Sarah is very well known because of the content that she was creating around Conquest for a period of time. She did Crate with Xerath, and Xerath is a very visible person kind of as part of the content creator community. And then I have a face for radio. Like that, I was kind of like the secret person that didn't kind of get out a lot. And again, I think there is a Venn diagram of people that watch the videos and kind of listen to the podcast, but I don't think that there's a ton of overlap on that side. So I've had people in our Discord, as I've kind of like chimed in like, hey, we don't do that here. It's like getting a message, who are you, to tell me that I'm like, I'm one of the hosts of one of the shows and this is my server, so you'll actually do what I asked you to do, type thing. Yeah. But I think that, and I got kind of lost in this of where the question was, but I think that what she and I tried to do quite a bit was just build this concept that was entertaining without the effort to be entertaining. Yeah. I think that there are a lot of people out there that they have their shtick and it works, but this is my issue, I guess, with content creation, and I don't actually watch a lot of it, even Star Wars Galaxy Raiders or anything else, is that when your effort to maintain your persona becomes more important than actually being true to yourself, that's where I think the problem starts to come in. And I get there are people that do this for various different reasons. There are some folks that make some money with this, and I'm happy for them from that standpoint. But I think that you probably lose a little bit of your sense when it gets into that. I'm a firm believer right now that social media is a failed experiment, because people spend too much time trying to be the image of themselves as opposed to who they are. I think Sarah and I were very real with who we were as part of those conversations. So,
I've had that conversation a lot recently. So I teach martial arts, and I'm a very public figure on a very local stage, right? So I'm not talking about this, but like if I go out to eat anywhere within 20-minute drive of where I work, I'm bound to have somebody stop me. A 10-year-old, a 22-year-old that I taught when they were 7, a parent. So there's always this idea of I have to have a persona to some extent. I always have to be like the best version of myself and make sure I'm watching what I'm doing. An example of that is before COVID, my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, we went to see Taylor Swift, the Reputation tour, and we did a tailgate. And, we got drunk on White Claws, and as white people do at tailgates. And I took everybody's garbage, so I had like 5 empty White Claws in my hands, and I'm walking into the venue, and one of my students calls out my name, and I turn around and I'm like, oh fuck, like I have like all of this alcohol like sitting there, and his parents are there, and I'm drunk, and just the idea of I have to watch what I'm doing no matter what. But to bring it back to your point with social media, I try to do the same thing where I tell people what Egnards is and who Egnards is like 95% my real personality, 5% toning it down to make sure it's not obnoxious. Like I want to be as real as I absolutely possibly can, but I also understand that there's a little bit of a give and take.
Yeah, it's funny. Over the last couple of years, I've been at work. I've been kind of put in a position of what my boss likes to call technical leadership. People don't work for me. In fact, I don't ever want anyone to work for me. But organizationally, I sit relatively high up, and I spend a lot of time with, we individual contributors are the fancy word that we use for kind of the rank and file from that side. And one of the things that I started to learn through those conversations, that I think you heard a lot of that this past week on that last episode of HNN, is when you're vulnerable, and I say vulnerable because I spent 35 years of my life thinking that meant weak. But when you're vulnerable and you actually tell people about failures or where you've come short, or honestly being true with feelings, and understanding, like when I talked about I was missing something in my life and I didn't realize that, like that's a really hard thing for people to say, but people absolutely understand and gravitate towards that. And like as you're talking about getting out in front of people and having to maybe to dial some of that back and understand where those pieces are, there's also a certain point of you end up getting a lot more respect from people when you're actually, again, honest with you are, and presenting that real version of what's in place. And it's I have told people for the longest time, in my industry there's this massive certification that's very difficult to achieve, and I spend more time talking about my failures attempting to get that than I ever actually do talking about when I passed it, because that failure is something that resonates with people. That idea of coming up short, because if you're going to tell me you've never failed at anything in life, I'm going to tell you you've never tried.
Yeah.
Like that's the way that I look at that. But I think that ability to, again, be honest, admit mistakes, admit when you're wrong, that's what resonates with people, as opposed to this, like, I'm always right. I'm always right. This is my answer. And frankly, some of the other crap that we just see on these platforms. So.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like I said, with that last episode, I wish I had like a notepad with me, because I was sitting there, I was like, yeah, fuck, like this is me to a T, and like, shit, like is he in my brain, or is she in my brain? The whole idea, and you just kind of brought this up, the idea of needing to connect and like talk to people and have like this platform. And it's not a platform because you necessarily want people to listen to you, but it's more of like a communication platform. Yeah. And I've kind of joked recently, where I say joked, but I'm kind of realizing it's true, that doing this is almost like a midlife crisis to me. It's like therapy when I get on and I just talk to people, and I'm like, this is what I need, and I don't care who watches it. I just want to connect on some level with people around the world.
Yeah, well, and look, so there's a couple pieces. One, we need a broad range of content, because there's a broad range of people that need things. And I think what was interesting is, and I'm happy to talk about this, because I'll be honest, I wasn't completely happy with the video that Arnold made at the beginning, but it was interesting when he started talking about his demographics this week, about how the time commitment to Galaxy of Heroes is starting to bleed down, or there's an impact there. And it was interesting when he started showing his demographics. And if you would have asked me what my view of demographics were, who I thought played this game, I probably would have said it skewed a little bit older than what he described. And I never would have, I don't think this game is absolutely anything geared towards, or not even geared, but attractive to middle school, high school, and early college players, because I think that Star Wars isn't relevant to that community, like to that group of people. It just hasn't been big enough in that time window. I'm a huge enough Star Wars fan that I hosted a bi-weekly podcast. My kids could care less about Star Wars. Like I can't get them to adopt that. But as he talked about his demographics skewed under 35, I would have argued that the demographics probably skewed over 35. Point of view of where the audience are, and I think that we need that for in different places. I think for Sarah and I, and kind of what our thing was, it was that someone actually sent it to me this week, and it was, they always felt that when we were having a conversation, they were sitting at the table with us, involved in that conversation. I think that there are people that are looking for those types of things from that side. Again, your comment about therapy, this is a hell of a lot cheaper than actually going to see a shrink, yes, once a month, and to where those things sit. But again, it's people are looking for connections, or where it's look, you want to go on a really great tangent. We can talk about Radiohead's OK Computer, which the whole theme of that was, as we became more and more connected as a society, we became more and more disconnected as individuals. Like 100%. There's a belief that's and that's 20 years old. Like that. So I think that we're still fighting those same challenges that way. So.
Well, that kind of loops right around to social media, right? Like when we talk about, yes, as we get more connected, we're connected to everybody around the world, but everybody kind of builds up these personas. and you see it all the time on social media. And Bo Burnham just did, when he did Inside, I don't know if you're familiar with it, one song was White Woman's Instagram. And it was basically just comments of like what you would see, right? Like, and it was all like memorial posts and like out with flowers and like all things shiplap and like whatever, all these things that aren't real, but they get tons of likes. And it's a very informed song, and for anyone that hasn't seen the special itself, which was done during COVID, you know, he's developed himself from shock comedy and like dick jokes into just very informed and smart looks into society and into social media and what that looks like and what it's like to be a content creator and feel like you're always performing.
Look, it's interesting when you're saying like that. Yeah, because everybody in their 20s starts with dick jokes because those get laughs and it's easy to do that and it's comfortable. I think that idea of growth, and again, I'm not the same person now that I was when I was 25 years old, and thankfully I'm not the same person that I was 25. Not because it was terrible. I think that I'm so much better right now, but I've grown. Like it's this. Yeah. If you're not taking things that are happening in life and kind of building upon those from that standpoint. I did spend a period of time in about, we'll call it 8 years ago, with kind of where I was professionally. I was spending a lot of time trying to build a brand in like tech, you know, social media, and just found out that I hated it. It made me feel terrible. I actually had a coworker of mine pass away in a very, very horrific accident, and I reached out to someone that kind of worked out of the same office that I knew tangentially was, you know, again, actually in the same company as I was, but again, a very, very vocal person on technology, social media, and they were talking about putting something together as a memorial. And I reached out and I'm like, hey, I worked very closely with this individual and my team. Anything you do, we'd like to be looped in on. Like literally, the guy, he and I had the same boss. Like that's where we worked. And the response back I got was like, who the hell are you and why are you reaching out to me? And I'm like, and again, it was that mentality of no, I have a higher follower count. Like that's how I equated some of those things back in those cases. And I'm like, no, so that was actually the genesis for me kind of stepping away from a lot of these things from that side. So I have a hard time following sports now because I don't use Twitter, because that's where all that content goes, you know. So I don't know. There were some interesting things on the Reddit thread. Like I thought the Reddit thread of Sarah leaving was a microcosm of everything that's wrong with kind of modern communication platforms, more importantly, our community.
Yes.
You know, the first was, it was a very nice post that someone made, and it was great, and I appreciated it from that side. And then you had the people that felt the need to comment like, I don't know who the hell this person is. Like, shut up. You don't need to participate here. The one that really bothered me is how she's now being used to drive other people's agendas.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, I told her that I'm going to talk about this a little bit, but I don't want to put words in her mouth. Sarah never once said the time commitments of the game are too much. What she said was, I have other things in life that are pulling time away, and I've made a decision to go in a different direction. This is not an indictment on CG. It's not an indictment on the game. It's a conversation around changing life needs, changing life demands. And there's just been too many people that have used this for, CG, you have to change your game because you're driving people away. That's not what this was. And it bothers me. It so bothers me when people start to do that. And again, I think that's just a common thing that people try to do when they're trying to, you know, it's the, you gave me a voice, so I'm going to use it. Well, maybe you shouldn't. Like we always don't need everyone's opinion on these matters. And I'm clearly giving an opinion here, so yes, it's very hyperbolic. I'm allowed to do that because you've asked me my opinion. So.
It was interesting, and like I said, and I had commented there as well. I was very happy to see it. I was disappointed when I didn't see I don't want to say memorial thread, but it really is what it is. I was disappointed when I didn't see one in the first 24 hours, and I was very happy to see that. And when you first brought this up, I knew exactly what you were going to talk about. And I was like, oh, like everything going on there, and how it became like it was first like a very positive thing, and then became everybody kind of yelling at each other.
Yeah.
You know, and this brings back a lot of themes. We can talk about, you know, like the diversity of the game, and I will tell you, after commenting on that thread, the majority of my followers and my participation is on Reddit. You know, it's on in not spoken word, written word. And after I had posted and after people had seen it, I had multiple people reach out to me on Discord, you know, kind of just sharing their experiences as people who are outside of the typical demographic that we kind of expect for the game. You know, people of color who I talk to often who are like, man, it really sucks that this is happening, and women who have reached out, and trans women who have reached out, you know, all people that you wouldn't expect to be playing this game who don't see the same representation that I really would like to see. And we talked about privately where I, you know, every time I reach out to someone, for the most part, I don't know who they are. I don't know what they look like. And then they pop up on screen and I go, oh, hey, white guy. What a surprise. You know, but we try. And there are those people out there. But again, there are people who are willing to be on camera or be spoken or share who they are. And there's people who are not. And, you know, I would like to show that I know the game isn't diverse, but that it's more diverse than maybe some people realize.
Well, look, I don't think it's even a case of talking about is it more diverse or things like that. I think that when you allow other voices into the conversation, and allow is not even the right term. When you give space for other voices to participate, you find you hear really interesting things. And look, I catch a lot of shit on our Discord because I let a lot of non Star Wars kind of bleed into my commentary. But the reality is that's a part of my existence. Like it's yes. I tend to pull a lot of things from a lot of places of just what I see, and you know, I'll give an example of why listening to these other voices matter. I work with a phenomenal gentleman who's African American, and came into my industry from a little different path. And he and I were going to be putting together a conversation for some coworkers around this idea of creating space for other people to speak on this. And I made an assumption that he wanted to talk about being African American in technology because there are just not a lot of people that look like him. Again, it's a lot of fat white guys. Is kind of where we are these days. And he's like, no. He's like, I actually want to talk about how difficult it was to break into this field coming from poverty. And he kind of took me down this whole path of, you know, if you don't have access to technology, how do you actually learn to use it? And these certifications are very expensive in this whole thing. And I'm like, I never once. I made an assumption of what he wanted to talk about, never once actually thinking about it. Like, no, he wants to talk about it from a different. Now, he will tell you his background absolutely has a piece to tie into that. But this is why I think it's so important to get those other voices. I mean, it was and I made the comment on our last episode about how it's sad to see Sarah, who again I think is the only woman content creator that I'm aware of. All right. But I would have always described Sarah as a content creator who's a woman as opposed to a woman content creator. And I think that distinction matters between the two. I would love to have an opportunity for other people to do that. And this is one of the things that you and I we talked about a little bit as part of that is how do you create that? How do you create that space to do so without it becoming across is very transparent, because there are a subset of people in this community that if you are being very transparent about what you're trying to do, they're going to tell you that it's because you're nefarious and you're a terrible person and all of these other things. And I just, it's a difficult place to be in right now.
I would, I would agree. And I know I've had this conversation with a few people, and I don't know if it's kind of parallel. It's tangentially what we're talking about, but also kind of on the aside when we talk about like woke culture. And I made a comment maybe like 6 months ago, and it resonated enough where people did reach out to me on Discord, where I had said, in my experience, anyone who uses woke as a verb, and it not being ironic is probably an asshole. If you're somebody who's using that as an agenda to say like, oh, well, there's gay people in the show, so there's an agenda here, you're probably a piece of shit. And if those people want to unfollow me, they're welcome to. I don't care. You can have characters that are diverse in a show, and The Acolyte is a great example. I don't hate the show because, as other people put it, it's about a coven of lesbian witches. I hate the show because I just didn't think it was a good show. I didn't think it was quality. That never even was brought into my stream of consciousness until I saw it on Reddit, until I saw it on Discord, until I saw it on social media. And I was like, oh, I just thought that it was written poorly. I don't even think about that.
Yeah. If I have to hear one of the two girls yell the word mama one more time, I might actually throw my TV out the window because I just hated that. But it's the same thing. It's the other. I go back to all of the hate for the back half trilogy, and I've made this argument to people before. It's okay to understand that some things aren't made for you.
Yeah.
And some things aren't your target demographic. The prequels, not the prequels, excuse me, the postquels were okay. But when I was when they were on Crate, and I was sitting in the movie theater with, at the time, I think he was 4. My son was 4 or 5. And when Huey flies the Falcon in and takes out the 3 TIE fighters, and this little boy, and again, as I just got done saying, like, they're not into it, but they are, but they aren't. But this 4 or 5-year-old, as he fist pumps in the theater when this happens, and it's just like that will be my memory of that movie forever. Is that like, oh, other people can enjoy this.
Yes.
Other people can have their memories of these things, and it's okay to say you don't like something. You don't have to then go convince everyone else why you're right.
Yes.
I don't like it and move on. I don't like hummus. I think hummus to me is the texture, the color, and the shape is C. diff. And if you don't know what C. diff is, well, you don't because you don't have kids yet. But like that's how I view it. I don't stand at a buffet table and try and convince people that hummus is terrible and you shouldn't eat it. I just don't put it on my plate and I go along with my business. If more people did that, we would generally be happier as a group of people. So, it's driving me nuts. I keep hearing myself wrap up statements by saying "so," and I now want to just like punch myself in the face. It's driving me up the wall.
Well, I'll save you for a second, and I will say that I agree that there are problems with the sequels, and I've been vocal on Discord in a Star Wars server where that's something that you talk about. It's not something that I talk about in my real life. It's not something I talk about at work. But it does bring back a point of, even though I don't think they're necessarily good sequels, and I've said this a lot, is just because something's not for you, or rather, let me backtrack that and say that people are really bad at discerning the difference between not for you and not good. And you see it with games, you see it with movies, you see it with books. A book can be good, and just, it's not in your wheelhouse. A movie can be great, but it's just not something you're interested in. And I think that people are just really bad at looking at the difference between those two things.
Yes. Yeah. You have never grown up in a world without the internet, have you?
So I did. The internet obviously came out 70s, 80s, but when we talk about home internet, I was probably in the 6th or 7th grade when it became like a readily available thing.
Okay. So I'm a little bit older that I went through all of college without having access to the internet in my pocket. All right. So we would argue all the time. Like you could argue sports. Like the longest running argument between my friends and I was who would win in a race, a human being or a chimpanzee. 100-yard dash. The qualifier always was a normal human being, not Carl Lewis, because at the time Carl Lewis was the fastest man in the world. To the point that one of my friends actually called the Indianapolis Zoo at 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday night, claiming to be a researcher, trying to get information, and left a number from that side. And those were fun arguments because there was no way to validate it, and you could bicker and fight, but arguing about some of these things, when we get into media, they just become like, there's a difference between arguing like I'm right when it comes to the monkey race, and there's arguing I'm right that no, Ray is the worst character that's ever been created.
Yeah.
The monkey thing is I'm gonna try and pull stats out of my ass to make something happen. The monkey piece very much feels like I'm coming from a place that I'm trying to justify a broader conversation that I'm just not willing to say in front of a group of people. Again, further proof the internet is terrible. The ChatGPT finally answered, after 30 years, finally answered the question for us, and we're now all sad. And it is, a chimpanzee would outrun a human being, provided you could get it to run in a straight line, which ChatGPT did not believe that it could.
See, I would have thought human just because we're an endurance animal, but I don't know that much about chimpanzees, so I would have been on the other side of that.
Yeah. One of the guys that the argument with, we took a class in college together called The Psychology of Monkeys and Apes, which was part of where all of this kind of came out of. We knew way too much about monkeys in like 1995. It was not great.
But you know what? Those are really fun things. And so for me, the internet, 6th, 7th grade was AOL 3.0. When I went into college, it was like 2006. So cable internet existed. It was nowhere near as fast as it is now. Yeah. It was still kind of a wild, wild west. You could still have those types of arguments to some extent, right? Now, even without ChatGPT, there's billions upon billions upon billions of resources where you can get an answer to just about anything that you could possibly want. And it does stifle conversation between people to just say, oh, hey, boom, this is it. But then at the same time, we look at the other aspect of it, and there's just so much. I hate to use the term fake news, but there's resources that are not verified, is what I would say. There's anybody can write anything they want on the internet, and anybody can believe anything they want, and that becomes a very dangerous thing.
2 weeks ago, something I said to a coworker that I prefaced with, I have no way to verify this, but I believe this statement to be accurate. 2 weeks later, it came back to me. Someone said, well, I was told this as a statement of fact. I'm like, whoa. I was the originator of that. And I also said, don't share this because I'm not convinced that it's accurate or not. That's the problem that we get into these days, that it was a little bit of that game of telephone was kind of lost the entire way through.
Well, listen, I could spend the next 6 hours just talking on this specific topic. But the real bread and butter and the reason, like, I couldn't sleep last night. I woke up like 10 times. I was like, all right, I'm having these conversations in the morning and I have to do what it is. The real reason that they had reached out to you and kind of bringing it back to the game itself, you had said, actually, the first time outside of our original conversation, someone, I won't name them, had reached out to me on Discord and said, do you want to piss off Pico? And I don't know why he even said this. This was almost a year ago. Talk about whaling. Talk about the term whaling. He hates the term whaling. And we've talked since then, and I've heard HNN and like your discussion on HNN since then. And the conversation that I wanted to have really has to do with like dolphins, whaling, casual spenders, the idea that it's okay to spend. And the two things I want to preface this with is, what we're talking about isn't necessarily being pro-CG or anti-CG. It's just people with a nuanced opinion that understand both sides. At least I want to put it that way. But the reason I had reached out recently is we had on Discord, I have a Mac. The Mac is not great for this type of content creation and everything. We had decided I did not want to take donations. I thought of this genius plan. Let's do some sponsored games. I'll get on Twitch. I'll sell my soul for a couple of weeks. We'll play some shitty games. I won't name them, but we'll play some shitty games and we'll have some fun. We had a lot of fun just like chatting and joking about the games and trying to break the games and solve the games. And after seeing some of the monetization practices in other games and just how abusive it looks in comparison, that's what prompted me to reach back out to you and say, hey, this is the perfect time. This is when we need to do this. This is where we need to talk about the idea of spending money. And we talk about like the Reddit idea of people going, oh, every single pack sucks and fuck this game and $10 is way too much for whatever else. But talking about the idea of currency versus time and disposable income and why it's okay, and I don't know, I could go on forever, but the idea is it's okay to spend your money on the things that are fun for you. Yes,
hands down. Look, there's a couple pieces here. I do have a problem with the term whale, and it's not. I don't mind the term spender. I have a problem with the term whale because, in my opinion, the term whale has a negative connotation to it. All right, it's back to, and this is I've kind of driven this point in our Discord that why is it okay for you to call me a whale, but if you don't spend, I can't call you a poor, because it's the same idea behind it. You are making a judgment call against someone.
Yes.
That of why they're doing something. The reality is, this is my Galaxy of Heroes is my hobby.
Yeah.
Right? It is no different than golf. It is no different than classic cars, and it's no different than motorcycles. I've got a coworker of mine that I would love to know how much he's got invested in his barbecue equipment that he has from that side. They're hobbies. It's what brings me joy from the tedium of my life. All right. So how I choose to spend my money should not be a topic of conversation for anyone else. In fact, we have removed one person in the history of our Discord, and that was at its core someone that could not get over asking about my spending habits or talking about things in terms of my spending habits of doing this. That has always been my piece. You don't want to spend? Don't. You want to?
Yeah.
Go for it. This is what I do. Now, for me, a great job. My wife's got a great job. Our kids are taken care of. I'm in a position that I can do it. I understand that not everyone can, and I understand that if that idea that $10 in crystals is not in your budget, and I get the frustration associated with it from that side. But this becomes a judgment value conversation, and it just frustrates me beyond belief when people argue about it. And just to maybe make a pivot on this. One of the interesting things that came up in my guild's Discord this week, and my time has not allowed me to play a lot of Grand Arena over the past 2 months. I have stopped, so I've fallen pretty deep into K2. Wow, we're actually talking a little bit of Star Wars content here. So I've fallen a little bit into K2, and I tend to go now 3 and 6, and most of those are taking 10s. I made the comment that, and I'm starting to see a lot of people of my same GP level down in that range, and I just made the comment, like, I have some opinions of why that's the case, and people throw a bunch of things, and I'm like, no. The reality is that if you're willing to spend on the game, the time commitment to play GAC to earn 800 or 900 crystals isn't worth it in the long run when you can throw money at the problem, make it go away.
Yeah.
And a couple people sat down and started doing the math and figured out they're paying themselves on the average of $4 an hour to play GAC.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way to start looking at these. And when you start talking about that time value piece, is like, no, my time is valuable. Now, if you want to play because you enjoy it, that's great. But if you don't, you can make that back up in some other direction. And that's, I think, where a lot of this conversation probably needs to come down to, more so than just spend bad. No, it's a time value conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I have guys in my guild who don't participate in GAC, and even without doing the math, they have outright said, I'd rather spend $99 a month on a vault than spend that hour a night 3 weeks out of the month doing a piece of content that I don't enjoy. You know, and I'm very well known for, I don't like GAC. I don't find it interesting. I don't find it fun. I put every single GL on my wall, and if I get full cleared, great. I love it. I do my 10, I walk away. I try my hardest, but trying your hardest as a whale is 15 minutes versus an hour, you know, and I do it as quickly as possible and get it done with. But I still win my 50%. So to me, that time value is, it doesn't make sense for me to push harder if I'm hitting that same metric that everybody else is supposed to be in. And, you know, talking on Reddit and seeing packs, people ask me constantly, they're like, hey, is this one worth it? And of course, you're on Reddit as well. I'm sure you see it. And this is probably where most of our conversations come down to, is you'll get, hey, is this valuable? And you'll have 10 comments that say, fuck it, nothing is valuable. And you'll have 10 comments that say, that's a piece of shit. And then you'll get like my comment or somebody else's that kind of breaks down the crystal value and says, hey, you know, this is more valuable than what's in the store. Do what you want with your money, you know, and it'll get shit on because, oh, you could go to the movies, or you could buy a AAA game, or you could do this, or what about both? You know, I'm an educator. Well, I don't make a lot of money, but I can buy a game and also spend $20 if I want to. It's not the biggest deal.
Yeah. Again, it's back to this. The world is not a zero-sum game. We have ability. You know, again, I'll use probably I think what is the closest analogy to this, and I'm in a text message string with, you know, 5 or 6 buddies from college for the past 30 years, and 4 of them are big, you know, gambling is, I don't even know what to call the news, you know, the online gambling piece, because to me that's a different connotation, but they're put $20 on NFL games on a Sunday and kind of watch it from that perspective. Like, I'm just not interested in that. That's and again, I've never kind of gravitated towards that model. I like watching NFL games on Sunday. Love watching, you know, college football games on Saturday. It doesn't make sense to me. I make fun of them when they lose because, you know, that's fun, but I've never questioned what it is that they do with their money from that perspective. And I think it's the same thing. It's they're spending this money on something that they enjoy doing. It gives them a little bit of interest from that perspective, you know. And never once have I, you know, gave them a hard time because, you know, one of them maybe didn't come in town for a concert that we were talking about. Like, well, you know, if you weren't gambling on Sundays, you'd have had the money to buy that ticket. Like, no, it's just, it becomes a case of this is what they want to do with their money. I work my tail off so that I can do the things in life that I want to.
Yes.
That's the whole point of it. And to criticize someone else, it makes no sense. I can't wrap my head around it from that side. I get the frustration piece. I get the FOMO aspect of it, but don't target individuals. Don't go after it from that side.
Absolutely.
Now, all of that said, what I do want to add into that, I do think what you do on Reddit is really important, because I think I think understanding the value of some of those things absolutely matter, because there are some things that are just better usage of spending cash on than probably anything else.
Yeah, and that's, I think for me, my whole goal, and I do roster reviews, and I actually, last week I had somebody who self-proclaimed, let me know, I have people kind of fill out a survey, and he said, hey, I spend $500 a month on this game. And obviously my first point was, holy shit, like, that's a lot. Yeah. What are you spending this on? But I also asked people to do testimonials, and afterwards he had said in this testimonial to me was, you know, I appreciate your very measured review, and you take that out of it. And my whole thing is, do you want to spend less, or do you want more resources and to spend the same amount? I don't care which one you do, you know. My goal is, I would like for people to spend less but get the same amount out of it. Yeah. But if you want to spend that same amount, like, I don't give a shit. Like, that's fine. That's your money, you know. Like, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't affect my checkbook. Checkbook, it's not a thing anymore, but it doesn't affect my finances at all. And that's what keeps the game, I don't want to say free for me, because I have spent a considerable amount of money over 8 years, but it
Yeah.
keeps the servers on for everybody else, and I think that that's something that's lost on a lot of players.
Well, and one of the things, and as you talk about like keeping the servers on, it's one of the things that you and I have talked about it on this is, this idea that CG is greedy or CG is only out there to make money. First of all, that's not true. And look, I genuinely believe that people try to do their best in life. I genuinely believe that people want to do the right thing. All right. The developers of this game go into work every week to bust their ass to build something that they think that people are going to enjoy and have fun. All right. Now, they also want to make money.
Of course.
If you work for a company and your owner is not going out of his way every waking moment to maximize his profits, that is a company you need to leave because you are destined for failure in that company and you're going to find yourself out of a job. All right. Now, there is a whole other aspect of this, of some of the corporate greed pieces, and I get some of that. But yes, it is in CG's best interest to try and convert people that don't spend into spenders and to maximize this concept of wallet share. I want to be able to pull out what I can from that side. But I don't think that we should hold it against them that they're trying to be profitable. If they're not profitable, the game dies. If the game dies, then we have a vacuum, and then we're shoved into some of these other games that I won't mention by name because they actually are the reason why we're able to talk this way today, because you've got a brand new PC that's sitting next to it. But so again, yes, there have been terrible packs. There have been absolutely terrible packs. Some of them, they're throwing a fishing line on the water and they can see what am I going to catch coming out of this. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because what we start seeing is we start seeing some of these really good packs dial in and they start being added, they start being offered repetitively. Like, I will argue that the $10 mod pack on Monday mornings is the best use of $10 in the game right now. And that's been in place for what, 5 years?
For a long time. And I know people that buy it every week.
Yeah, they dial it into that point. Some of these they have to kind of figure out whether, yes, the latest $200 pack. There are people that bought it. I took a look at it. I'm like, not me. But again, there's nothing wrong with them trying to make money. There just isn't.
So there's two things that I want to address here. The first one, I think, when we talk about like specific packs, there was one pack, the community outreach pack, the like voted on by players pack that came out recently, right? I don't remember what the price point was. I think it was $15, $20. And there was a Reddit thread, and someone asked about it, and everybody was shitting on it. And I did the math, and I was like, hey, actually, you're making out if you buy this pack, Yeah. But the caveat to that was that you were getting so little of each thing that it didn't hit that dopamine hit that like you kind of want to hit, right? So if you spent that $15 on the pack, you're making out on crystal value, but it doesn't hit that idea of, okay, I bought something and I can immediately use it. It's kind of, I'm going to buy it and I have to wait a couple weeks for it to pay out because I need the other things that build that up. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't understand when they look at it and they go, oh, well, it's only 4 of this and 5 of that and 6 of that, and that's going to get me nothing. I'm not personally going to buy it because I need that dopamine hit. But I understand why people buy it, because value-wise, it was a really, really good value.
So the value piece of it aside, I think I tend to group players into one of two categories. The people that understand the predictive income of resources and the people that don't.
Yeah.
All right. So there was a period of time when I needed Zetas. I had a spreadsheet and I tracked it religiously for like 2 years, that I could show that I pulled in 4 full Zetas every month. So if I knew that a character was coming at the end of the month and there was going to, we'll say it was going to be a legendary character, which typically needed 3 Zetas at that point, and I knew that what I had right now, I could spend I could put these 2 Zetas on a character because I know by the end of the month, I will have earned all of those back and I can put it on the other side of it. Like, that's what I talk about, like predictive income of resources. Then there's the people that don't. There are the people that I have to hoard everything right now and I have to hold on to it because in 6 months, X may come and I have to be ready for X at that point. I think that's that, as you're describing, like that dopamine split. And I 100% agree with it. For me, Omicrons were kind of my weak spot for a long time. A pack that had 5 Omicrons in it were good because that was 25% of getting there.
Of an Omicron.
Something with 1 or 2 was no, because it was 10% and it felt like it was going to take too long. The reality is they kind of earned at the same point, and I think if you broke those packs down, they're typically they came in at the same price per Omicron in those cases. I think that people that don't understand that constant influx and then outflow of resources and managing that is the secret to the game, not necessarily being ready for the next thing when it comes.
Yes.
Because I think they're historically, I think the people that have to hoard on to everything and because there might be a Galactic Legend in 6 months are the people that just can't ever seem to catch up.
Yes. And, I think you and anyone listening is going to be surprised to learn that while I understand the predictive resource acquisition, and I've done the same thing with Zetas, and I go, okay, I get 14 from this, and I get 10 from this a month, and I get it. I don't actually keep any spreadsheets for myself or for my account. I will literally, and I'm dumb for doing this, and it's a waste of my damn time for doing this, but whenever I feel like I need to know, I will do the math in the moment. And on a notebook paper, I have, it's actually back there, instead of a sheet. That would be the smart way to do it. It's kind of like that middle ground of I get it, but I'm also kind of dumb at the same time.
Yeah.
And we're just gonna see what happens and go from there.
Is stupid as this is, there are actual games that I play or I go back to because I can build tracking sheets.
Yeah.
I did what was the Fallout Vault game?
Fallout Shelter. Yes.
Yes. I played that for the longest time because I built a really cool spreadsheet for how do I mate the vault dwellers to create better jobs, and then try because I just I've always liked that. I'm back to, I picked up EverQuest 2, which I've played off and on for the last 20 years, and I'm back to playing it right now, and they have this job system in place, and I've got this cool tracking spreadsheet of how I'm earning resources in it, and I like that aspect of it. Unfortunately, Galaxy of Heroes is in a place that I just don't have anything to track from that side. But to your point, if you can knock the math out, knock the math out. For me, I like you talk about dopamine hits. I love I put a number up in this cell and all of the numbers change all the way across like that. But again, that's just nerd stuff that I'm into from that side. But to your point, I don't think you have to have these things tracking from that standpoint, but it is an understanding of
understanding the idea.
Works.
Yes. I will say, you talking about numbers, I am I'm not playing any right now, but I am super, super addicted to those idle games where just numbers go up. Yeah. My monkey brain goes, numbers go up, this is good. And I've played dozens of them over the years. Numbers go up. It's the same fucking game. Yeah. Yeah. Cookie clicker, anti-idle, trim, it's the same fucking shit. But I will delete one and go, all right, let's try this next one. Numbers go up. I'm happy. Love it. Math brain. Let's keep going. And I try not to install games on my phone because I know that I will get addicted to the next adventure capitalist and just go, oh, numbers pretty. Love this shit.
But Capitalist was such a great game.
That was one of those first ones. I was like, oh, this is fucking great. But the second part of that, when we were talking about companies making money, and one of my favorite guilty pleasures to see on Reddit is when people go, this game has made $2 billion. They could keep the servers up forever. I don't think you understand how companies work. I don't think you get how this being a subsidiary works, where money goes to Disney, goes to EA, goes to costs, goes to taxes, goes to Google, goes to YouTube, goes to whatever else. It's not as easy as people think. CG is Smog sitting on their fucking tower of gold and going, this is great, I have $2 billion.
Yeah, so let's pull on that for a couple of minutes. For anyone who has complained about the taxes that they have to pay, just remember that your employer has to pay the same taxes for you on your behalf, because the government, various forms of government, get taxes from you, and taxes they get double whatever you pay because your employer is paying for it right there. So right there, that expense is coming off.
As
So
an employer, I know that.
yes, I don't think a lot of people do. I don't think a lot of people like is they years ago. I was on a call in again 13, 14 years ago, and state of Massachusetts was asking my employer how much it would cost for them to bring me onto their staff 20 hours a week. And I was on this call, and they kept pushing for an answer. And finally, my boss said, we would typically charge about $300 an hour for Brian. And I immediately got an instant message that said, don't think for a second you would see even half of that on the open market. And he came back through and he kind of built the math out of why they came up with that number, because you have to build that overhead into it.
Yeah.
The second piece. So let's talk a little bit of technology and cloud architecture. All right. So I believe all of these games are hosted in AWS.
Yes.
All right. So every time there is a software update for this game, and they blast all of those files up. So if it's a 1 gigabit update, they are paying, CG and EA are paying for every gigabit of data that's being transferred out of that system. There's a data transfer charge outside of just what it costs to run the services. From that standpoint, there is ongoing operational costs. So when they talk about just keeping the servers up and running, it actually costs them more money, incrementally more money, for every user that they attach to the system. You also need developers. You also need advertising. We can argue about how effective their advertising is, considering most of the characters they put on that don't really exist in the game, is the way they say that. They also pay a licensing fee to Lucas and Disney.
Yes.
Right? They don't just allow them to do this out of the goodness of their heart. A cut of that money has to go off in the other direction. And again, probably a very unpopular topic, the shareholders expect a cut.
Yes.
The shareholders of EA expect a cut coming out of that. It's expensive to run. All right. And hopefully, fingers crossed, they're paying their developers what they earn, or what they deserve in that case. And we can only make an assumption on that standpoint. So it's expensive to run a business.
Yes, 100%. And going back to like shareholders, and again, I want to just stress again that I'm not saying, hey, this is like pro CG propaganda. Meathead didn't reach out to me and say, hey, I'll promise you 20,000 crystals to do this video. Yeah. This is just two adults talking from a more measured standpoint. But when it comes to like a public corporation, I think a lot of people don't realize like your literal sole goal is make money for shareholders. Once you go public, like that is your only objective. Your shareholders are, to an extent, with some nuance there, they're in charge. If they're not making their money and they're not happy with the board, that board is going to get ousted. Now, of course, we can talk about like majority shares, minority shares, and like blah, blah, blah. And that's just a little bit more complex. But as just a general rule, as a corporation, that is your job, is to make that money.
Well, and again, insert EA joke here, but part of what Galaxy of Heroes makes goes back to EA, and then EA turns around and invests that back into other games that may or may not be Galaxy of Heroes from that side, so that we can get the next AAA game that comes along with that. So there becomes this kind of self-feeding thing. I will tell you, well, $2 billion sounds like a very large number. All right, I work for a Fortune 50 company. If I look at my territory that I cover, I will tell you that $2 billion is not a lot. If again, how some of these companies make money and how that looks like, it sounds like a big number, but the reality is, especially for someone like EA, it's really a drop in the bucket of what they're earning from that perspective. Also, we can talk about they've got enough to keep the servers running forever, but if there's no revenue coming in from those servers, they're going to turn it off, because again, they have to pay people to maintain those things as well. There's a people cost associated with it.
Absolutely. 100%. And when we talk about like $2 billion being a very small amount, I think that some people look at it from, I do too. Like, I would love to have $2 billion. That'd be fucking great, right? Like any of us, $2 billion, yes, please. But there's a difference between it and even my business. If my business had $2 billion, awesome. But there's a difference between an individual having $2 billion. There's a difference between a very localized business having $200. And there's a difference between a global brand that is a publisher of major AAA games having $2 billion. Like, they're not comparable at all.
Legal, HR, you've got workplace resources for making sure that their offices are set up. You know, there's all of these other things that are, and again, this is not in defense of corporations. Like I believe I've been openly referred to as a bootlicker by a couple of members of the HNN community in the past. It is not. Look, I am absolutely, I want to extract for employees. I want to extract out as much money as possible. If you want, I'm happy to give you 15 minutes on my opinion of kind of what's going on with NIL money in college football. Because, well, I want to see all the players get all the money that they want to. It's a shit show, and just go look at UNLV, why it's all broken right now. But at the same time, again, it's not. There's a piece of corporate greed, but there's also a piece of I just have to run the business.
Yes.
You know, I refer to this as account manager math. Or sales manager math, is that all numbers grow at 10% until the end of time, because that's the expectation that's there. The reality is that it's not. That's just not the way that it works. So you have to build a business that can survive some of these downturns in different pieces of the game, so that when EA is, you know, they're trying to get the next version of Call of Duty out the door, because again, we know that that's their massive moneymaker from that side. Well, part of what they do to bridge that is through cosmetics in those pieces, in those aspects of those games. Yes, they talk about. Do you really talk about the dollar value associated with these AAA games? Why so many of them are going to a subscription-based model? Because it's the only thing that's keeping them from actually having those games be $100. Is that they're moving to a subscription model.
That is something that I've talked to people a lot, and just to, again, preface this, you know, when we have the conversations of being a bootlicker and being pro-corporation or being pro, like, billions of dollars, it's understanding the difference, just like people have trouble understanding the difference between something not being for you versus not being good. There are tons and tons and tons of criticisms that I have for corporations, and I do believe that there needs to be more employee protections and more going to the employees.
Agreed.
But that's a different conversation where we're talking about the system as it is, and why the system is as it is. And if you want to discuss changes to the system, that's a different conversation. And they're kind of like in a Venn diagram where there's a middle piece. But a lot of people aren't talking about changes to the system. They're just saying, this fucking sucks the way it is, and it needs to be different right this second. There's a process. There's a way it needs to be gone about. And yes, I agree. I don't think that the way that EA is run is super great, but that's the same as Disney. That's the same as Microsoft. That's the same as any major corporation. And I'd love to have that conversation about how we go about changing that on a global scale, because I do think it needs to be changed. But as the system is now, CG's, again, based on the other games I've played, it's really not as bad as people really think it is.
The fact that with the exception of like journey guides and some of those things, every character is available for free, 30 days after its release? Is it 6 weeks after its release?
I think it's like 4 weeks for shipments and another like 4, but there's like some leeway in there.
Yeah. So again, I've gone back and forth with Strike Force multiple times. That's just not the case with that game. So some of the I'll say games are probably primarily targeted for Asian markets. Absolutely not the case, because I think that they're just a much more acceptable microtransaction in those environments. Again, would I love to see a $25 a month subscription model where I got everything that I wanted and play for it? Absolutely. I will tell you right now that the community wouldn't be acceptable to that.
Yes, 100%.
The MMO model of pay me $20 a month for the right to play this game has gone away. It's just, I think even like, what the OG, the World of War, I shouldn't say the OG, but World of Warcraft, which is kind of the longest running super hyper successful of this. There's still a free to play model associated with that game that's a tiered system, because, and again, they started with a $20 a month model. and I can't tell you how many people I knew that paid for 4 or 5 accounts that were paying 120 bucks a month for the right to play that game. That has gone away as we've gotten more and more into this free to play model. Yes, you can talk about longer term that probably makes some of these companies more money, but the market also has that's the direction that they're going. I don't have the numbers with me right now, but this actually came up on the H&N server recently where they were talking about I think it was, oh man, I can't quote numbers because I will completely screw this up, but essentially they were talking about the amount of unique purchasers of cosmetics in like some of the EA games. And my argument to this was maybe it's time we stop arguing that the community that players don't want microtransactions, because it sure seems like a lot of them are interacting with microtransactions.
Yes.
And again, it's a value conversation for you that's different, but clearly the market is acceptive of this model.
I will say I mean, so many things to comment on, but I used to play MOBA games like right out of college, League of Legends, like back when they were new, and I see people talk about like, oh, like it's a waste of money to buy a skin. I used to spend $10 on a skin because for me, I got more enjoyment out of my little Vigor mage looking like a leprechaun. It made the game more fun for me. I enjoyed doing that. My like big statue guy, I don't remember his name, Karthus, I think it was, him as the Statue of Liberty, I thought that was the funniest shit in the world, and it was worth $5 for me to be the Statue of fucking Liberty while playing a game. Like, I enjoyed the game more for my $5 or for my $10. And I grew up in that era. So my first MMO, I grew up in that MMO era, was Star Wars Galaxies. Like in that first week, that's where the Egnard game name comes from, was being a teenager and putting together some letters and just randomly doing it. And I remember grinding like my Jedi slot and waking up at 3 a.m. so that I could grind it without like being attacked by bounty hunters. I walked to GameStop to buy time cards to play the game. Like that was just part of the experience, and I don't regret a minute of it. Like it was excellent. It was awesome.
And again, it gets back to the time and money were worth it because of the enjoyment that came out of it.
Yeah.
And that's the core of where this comes back to. And look, this isn't well, I find smoking to be a very unhealthy habit. Someone actually pointed out to me recently the cost of cigarettes. I was blown away on what that looks like. But I also have a friend who has told me that his favorite thing in the world is having his first cigarette as soon as he wakes up in the morning, sitting on his front porch, because it's quiet, it's peaceful, and it allows him to reset his day. Like,
yeah,
would love it if he doesn't do it from that standpoint. But there's a piece of it's harmful, it's expensive, but it is a foundation of where you're at. And I don't have to love it. I don't even have to respect it, but I understand where that's at. And I don't now criticize when he does it anymore, except I tell him that if he's going to smell like ass when he comes back in from wherever he's at, he needs to stand a little bit further away from me from that time. But I see that no different.
I think my biggest criticism with smoking, and I will say that this is not a pro-smoking PSA either, is smokers in general, and I have a lot of friends who are either recently quit or are still smoking, is that idea of we would do like poker games, and you'd have like a 10-man poker game, and every 10 minutes it was, I need a smoke break, I need a smoke break, I need a smoke break. So a 2-hour poker game now became a 5-hour poker game. But not even where you're talking. It's just, all right, go out on the fucking porch and do your thing. We were in the middle of a hand, but fine, we can do it this way. I don't give a shit what you do, but I'd really prefer it not to also affect my time.
Yeah.
But I think the final point on what you've already said to me is when we talk about like game prices. I grew up in like the transition of the NES to the SNES era. And I remember games being $70. The Power Rangers game, my allowance was $2 a week. And that game was $70, and the game wasn't even that good. But I bought it and beat it in a couple hours for $70 and games have largely stagnated in price, but the cost to develop them has become so astronomical compared to where it was. And a lot of people just don't understand that. When we went from the $60 model to the $70 model and people are up in arms, games used to cost maybe 500 grand to make. Now they're costing the same as movies because of the extras that we all expect and require, and technologically and graphics wise.
So two things on that. I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and the 14-year-old plays a lot of video games, as you would expect. My daughter is a little bit more of the Roblox, Sims free to play type model. My son is playing other things, and I've asked him a bunch of times, like, why do you only play like online shooters? Like, I Star Wars Outlaws, I think is a fun game. Like, I can't get him to play Jedi Fallen Order, despite the fact that it's a great game. And and they have an allowance, and when it comes to things like that it's either birthday, Christmas, or you can spend your own money. And he kind of pointed out, he's like, Dad, that game is going to cost me 2 months of allowance.
Yeah.
Like, so I play these online shooters because they're free to play, and my buddies are all free to play, and I don't have to worry about it. Like, so that cost is kind of through the roof. The other piece is, and it's funny as you're talking about like the expectation of graphics. I saw as I'm picking on social media, I am a huge viewer of Instagram, because fart videos, cat videos, and Uncomfortable Ellie, I think is her name, like are my three favorite things in the world. But I ran across a video the other day that someone was saying, if episodes 4 through 6 were released today, this would be the internet reaction. And it was like just trashing all of these different things from those episodes, because again, it's the expectations are so high,
so much higher.
It's the when Vader's ship crashes into the Death Star and there's fire. Like, it was like, are you kidding me? Fire in space? That doesn't exist. I'm like, no. It was the coolest thing that ever happened. Maybe we don't complain about that.
We didn't care as much.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think expectations are through the roof. Now, I did hear a great argument the other day that there are great games that don't have those high level of expectation, but they're called indie games.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think is fair at the same time, but why am I... If you don't like AAA games, don't play AAA games, but then don't expect Fallen Order for $35.
Yes, absolutely. I just bought Hades 2, and I think it was $30.
How is it? Is it good?
I like it. I enjoy it. As I get older, and this is a whole nother conversation, I don't have time for big story arcing games. Yeah. When I was younger, I played Final Fantasy. I loved games that went on for 100 hours. I loved big cinematics. I don't have time for that. I hate sitting down to a game and I have a half hour to play and 20 minutes of it is a movie. I don't have that time. So like roguelikes, like that, where I can turn on the computer, I can play for 20 minutes, and then I can go to work. That's what I enjoy, but I also know that the actual content in that game is probably like 15, 20 hours of the same gameplay loop. But my monkey brain says this is great. I love it, and for $30, it's worth it.
Yeah, it's funny. I moved my Xbox downstairs to the basement where my son typically plays video games. We've got a multi-TV set up for some things down there, and I moved it because I got tired of spending so much time in my office. Like I feel like I'm always here.
Yeah.
And it's clear, even though I go downstairs and I will put headphones on and I will start playing Star Wars Outlaw, his tone changes. Like, and you'll hear him like, "Hey, not so loud, guy. My dad's down here, not so loud." Like, so then it becomes like uncomfortable because like it's funny, and it's the, I think the first time he let a swear word slip out in front of me, I looked at him and said, "You're 14. I would expect these are words you know and say. Just maybe when you say it around me, it doesn't sound so natural."
Yeah.
And he's like, "All right, I got it."
I remember listening to you talk about that on HNN, and I was laughing because as a teacher, as an educator, 4th grade, 5th grade, I know they're all cursing. Like, I am aware that they're all cursing. But again, if they were my kids, maybe different. When they curse around me as a teacher, I have to say, "Hey, you can't do that." But when I talk to other teachers afterwards and they get all angry, I have to stop and say, well, you were cursing at that age. And also, the way they used the word was appropriate, like, they were angry, they said shit, like, I have to tell them no, but it was correct.
They used their context clues.
You would have done it the same exact way.
I saw this. This was actually a Reddit post this morning. I don't remember what it was on, but it was a teacher that put a story up that was like, I just love being a part of these young people's lives. I watched a young girl walk up to a boy and ask her for his phone number. And you could tell that she was so nervous. And he pulled out his phone and said, "Will you type it in here?" And then I walked over and took their phones away from them because they're not allowed to have them in the hallway. And it was like, yes, that was awesome.
I see that at this age, like 4th, 5th grade, and I see that all the time. I've seen love notes just falling on the floor and like, "Dear blah blah blah, like I like you so much," and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
and it's cute to think back on that age and what we were doing at that age and how we were in the same position at that age, trying to figure out how to like ask that girl out and say, "Oh, I like her, but I don't know what to do with this information." It's an interesting, dynamic. So, yeah, I mean, we talk. I don't know how to bring this up. I love this conversation. Actually, I don't even want to bring up this conversation. I had something else that I wanted to bring up before that. Episodes 4 to 6.
Yes.
One of my favorite things to talk about on Reddit, not Reddit, Discord, when we talk about episodes 4 to 6 and we talk about the expectation change. One of my favorite things to do is remind people to go back and watch those movies. I don't know how often you watch them, but I've watched them recently and I love the shit out of them.
Yeah.
They're cheesy as hell.
Yes.
They're not good. The dialogue is awful. I love them.
Yes.
I love them to hell. But like when we look at those movies and then we compare them to these movies, we go, well, I didn't like these ones, but they really weren't as good. They're a product of their time, and it just hit right, and we all have these nostalgia glasses on, and that's fine. I know I have them on, and I will watch them every time they come on for that reason. But we view them as masterpieces.
In the concept of The Empire Strikes Back is significantly better than the reality of The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
It is. They're either overacted or they're underacted. Your point on the dialogue is spot on. My favorite is if you ever watch A New Hope on a super 4K TV, and you actually can see the square boxes around the ships as they fly through space. And again, product of the time, the technology didn't exist on that side. It doesn't make them bad. It's. You ever seen the movie Time Bandits?
Yes.
Like the original from like way back. It's terrible. Like it is a bad movie, but I love it. It is great. I will watch it every opportunity I get. In fact, when it came out on, I think it's Disney Plus has the new Time Bandits TV show. I actually went back and watched the movie because I love the movie from that side. And nostalgia is a real legitimate thing. With as bad as they are, they somehow launched this massive multimedia campaign across all of these different stories. But I will fight people over this. Go ahead and tell me about Luke Skywalker all you want to. Ahsoka Tano and Ezra Bridger are the two most well-written, arcing characters because a real writer sat down and wrote them.
Yeah.
It doesn't take away from Luke. In fact, I think the problem with Luke, not to get into the more recent ones, are people didn't like the fact that he had a character arc. Luke failed in life because their childhood hero failed, and that's not supposed to happen. That was Luke at the end of his life was much more interesting to me than Luke in the prequel. Even though he was a huge hero, and again, is when I was that age. Yeah, but Ahsoka Tano, Ezra Bridger are, again, my opinion, are just two of the most phenomenally well-written characters in all Star Wars.
I can't comment on Ezra just because, and I know people hate me for this, I haven't seen Rebels yet. I've started
Yeah.
it. I just, when I watch things at home, I get distracted, and that's the world that we live in now, where
Yeah.
I turn on something and I need to be on my computer, I have to be on my phone, I have to check my email, I got to get a snack.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time sitting down. But that, kind of doesn't lead into, but that's why I like going into the movies. And people give me shit. Why do you go to the movies every week? It's so expensive. You spend all this money. I like going to the movies because I get to shut off. I get the permission to turn off my phone and put it on Do Not Disturb and like watch something completely uninterrupted, and that goes back to that time value. I value that time and I value that money because I get to sit and watch something. Now, with that said, I have started Rebels, but I'm at the very, very beginning of it. I think like the beginning of season 2, and it's a very, very slow process for me to find that time.
One, yes, movies are expensive. They're worth it. I think that the challenge. I would love to know the people that are telling you that movies are too expensive. I would love to know how old they are and what their life situation is, because, and again, I think pre-kids for a lot of people, time and money for movies isn't a challenge because there's not that pull. For my wife and I, and again, our kids are older. Like we're finally at the point like we can go out to dinner by ourselves and some of those things. But there was a 10-year period that it wasn't that the movie was expensive. It was also the $100 for the babysitter, and it was all of the other things that kind of got associated with it. That if you go spend $40 on a bad movie, you spent $40 on a bad movie. If you spend $200 on a bad movie, man, you're grumpy about it for a period of time. Like
You're
that
pissed
cost
off.
starts to pile up from that. But also, finding 2.5, 3 hours to get away is it's not always the easiest thing in the world from that side. Which is why we watch everything through a TV, because again, it's that time perspective piece of it. It's someone who sees movies all the time, who watches a lot of movies. I would love to know this. Does anybody make comedies anymore?
Yeah, I mean, the landscape of movies has completely changed. We had this discussion yesterday. We just saw the new Aubrey Plaza movie, My Old Ass, which I'm not being paid to say this. I thought it was going to be like this just ha 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 comedy, but like awkward because that's who Aubrey Plaza is. And it's just a poignant and great story, and it's probably in my top of the year for something to see. But the landscape of movies has changed. So you're not going to find things like a Superbad or like a Ghostbusters or just like an outwardly like. But there's a lot of like great storytelling through comedies. One that came out a few years ago that actually got shit on by reviewers, and I don't normally give reviewers any credence. 80 for Brady. I fucking love that movie. Which was the old people that went and saw like Tom Brady win the Super Bowl in that one game. I wasn't even watching football at the time. We're very new football converts. It is probably in my top of the year that it came out, just because it was funny. It was outward and enjoyable, and it subverted not to give spoilers, but it's been like 3 years. It subverted the expectation of old people can only be funny if one of them's dying in the end. And it kind of like took away from that whole point that every old people comedy has like, oh, I have cancer and I'm going to die. They still make them. They're a little bit more few and far between. I think that a lot of movies now, horror has really become a big thing with like A24 and Blumhouse and all of those like indie studios that are trying things that are more on the scary side. And we like that.
Well, so I'm not a horror movie fan by any means whatsoever. So again, when I was 16 to 25, that was like the peak. Sandler, Spade, Farley,
Yes,
the Superbads, like the Dick and Fart Jokes movies that were. And to your point, I think that one. I think it's hard to make a lot of those movies because so many people would target the things that are said in those and try and ruin people's careers over.
Yeah.
And look, some of it was, in retrospect, was mean. Some of it also is like, hey, no, jokes can actually just be jokes. What I think it's funny when you talk about the horror movie thing is I feel like they've just changed the demographic for 16 to 25 as being horror movies. Like that's just, but we're still going to get the money on it. Like if you're 18 years old and you like a girl, you take her to a movie because it's one of the few things that you can afford to do. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's not a lot of things to do from that side. So yeah, I think it's turned into horror movies a little bit from that side. But I miss just the good old fashioned stupid dodgeball, old school, like those types of just stupid premise, stupid lines of jokes. Everyone is an absolute moron. Let's just go laugh. And reason why, have you? It's on. I don't know what's on Bad Monkey, which is the new streaming Vince Vaughn show.
I haven't seen it.
That is absolutely amazing. It is. And the comment I made to my wife the other day is, I'm glad Vince Vaughn disappeared for a while because I'm glad to see he's back to just being
Just being
like just being him. Like you can't do that for 20 years. You need to go away for a little bit so that I forget that it's there. But yeah.
I think if you look at those movies, so there's been a couple, like if you look at like stupid comedies, but largely they do try to tell, like, like Billy Madison, it told like an on the surface story.
Yes, yeah.
They do try to tell more of a story. So like Booksmart came out a few years ago, and it's about these two girls going to college. Very funny, outwardly hilarious. Yeah. There was another one I don't remember the name of that. It was like 3 12-year-olds, and it was hilarious and one of those types of comedies where you go, this like shouldn't work, but it does. But I do agree, like if you think of maybe like Tropic Thunder, you couldn't make Tropic Thunder now because there's going to be too many people not understanding the whole dude playing another dude as being a conversation starter as opposed to it being like racist. And you even got that at the time, people arguing over that. And other people having to say, no, you don't understand. That's the whole point of that character.
Yes.
Is for this conversation.
Yeah, that's a great one from that side. And again, it's there's this thing called nuance.
Yes.
That seems to be lost these days.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, I mean, it goes back to like talking about like woke like a verb to me. Yeah. Anyone who says it as a verb, you're probably an asshole. There was one comedy, Billy Eichner. I love Billy Eichner. Billy on the Street, Parks and Recreation. He did a movie. I don't remember what it was called, but it's essentially like people would call it like the gay romantic comedy. And it got a lot of flack for that. It wasn't a great movie, but it was a funny movie. It was hilarious, and I didn't go into it going, "Oh, I can't wait to watch this gay romantic comedy." This is Billy Eichner. Billy Eichner's hilarious. I just want to watch some stupid shit for an hour and a half. Yeah. And that's what it was, and I got my enjoyment out of it.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know how we got from the original 4 Star Wars to Billy Eichner, but we found a way to make that happen, all right? That's the important piece here.
So that's the 5 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but I don't know if Billy Eichner has ever played in a movie with Kevin Bacon. But that's the beauty of what we do here, is we start on Star Wars, and then once everybody tunes out and says, "Oh, this isn't about my fucking game that I play anymore," I get to just talk to people. Yeah. And actually, that brings me. I don't want to take up too much of your time, and also, we're going to the Broncos game, and my wife will kill me if I'm late. You kind of brought up a point that resonated with me with H&N, and I wanted to bring this up. The idea of connecting with people. I've done this a few times. We did a Reddit meetup a few months ago at a brewery close to here. I actually had people from my Discord. They know I live in like the New Jersey, New York area, who have reached out and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in New York for some work thing. Do you want to meet up at a pub for an hour?" And I love people. I am like you. I like to think of the positive people. I don't think about the what if I get murdered aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I've done it multiple times, and it's great to just like have a beer with somebody that you've maybe talked. One guy I went to Manhattan. I had never talked to him before. I had no idea who this guy was, but I knew he was like tangentially related to someone I did talk to, And it was nice to just sit down and share a beer with some dude on the internet that lived across the country. And that's the purpose. And I don't want to say that you shouldn't do that without being careful, obviously.
Yes.
But it can be fun to just say, "Hey, some people are in this area." Because I know you said somebody was pretty close to you. It can be fun, and I love that aspect of it, and I love when people reach out, and I whenever I can say, "Yeah, like I'll go, I'll spend my afternoon."
So I have met up with people in the past. Actually, through MMOs, I've actually. So I don't know if I told this story on H&M, so I have a friend of mine that I actually get together with him and his wife and some of his friends from the military. We play Pathfinder every other week. We actually just played last night. I have had a 25-year friendship with this person. We met for the first time last year.
Yeah.
Actually, this year. He brought his family out to see the eclipse with us. So he brought his family out. But it's now we have tried in the past and things have kind of gotten screwed up. But to that point of these communities that we build around these, and well, I shit all over social media, and I'll tell you that the internet was a mistake. This is one of the closest people in the world to me. I talk to him almost daily through these platforms, and we have built a friendship off of starting to play a video game together. And we have both gotten married in that time frame. We both had kids. We both had job changes. We've had all of these great things. We both lost family members, and it's. I think it's massively, massively important to build those relationships. And I go back to, like when you talk about these, like sitting down with these people and having these conversations, like a big part of my job is to walk into rooms of people that I have never met and have an hour to a 2-hour conversation with them. And if I have found if you walk in and you just throw the slides up and you run through the deck, typically doesn't work. You sit down and you actually have a conversation with someone and try to get to the core. I actually made one of my customers cry once, in a positive, negative way, I guess is a way to stay from that standpoint. But it was back to building that relationship. I have customers of mine that I have not seen in 4 years professionally that I see once a year at a beer festival, and then we go out of our way to meet up from that standpoint. And I view a lot of those same things as like what we're talking about here. It's back to what Sarah probably stayed around for 2 months longer than she intended to because of the relationships that we build from the side. It's there are times that you happen to live in a part of the world that it's a little bit easier to do that. As much as I get tired of hearing about how everything's in New York, LA, and Chicago, but it's true. There is an aspect of it from that side. But I think building these relationships are incredibly important. And I'll go back to the last thing on this. So I lost my dad 10 years ago this October, and I've talked about this a lot professionally in the context of mentorship and how you interact with people in your life. And my dad, who was not an outdoors person, all right, but said something to me once that kind of stuck with me, and that is, when you go camping, you leave the campsite better than what you found it. And I think that's probably like a Boy Scout, Cub Scout thing from that side. And as I got older in life, he started pushing on me that people are like campsites. And every time that you have an interaction with them, it is your responsibility to leave them in a better place than when you found them.
Yes.
And that is, I think, the core of well, we never explicitly talked about it. Like, that was always my mentality of when we sat down and did those episodes on HNN, is that I wanted people walking out of that, even when we talked about things that maybe weren't great in the game, I wanted them walking out of that feeling better about the conversation than they did going in. And I think when we talk about this idea of content creators, and we talk about this idea of platform, and I hate those terms, but there's no better way to describe it. That's what I think our responsibility is.
Yeah.
And I have a problem that there are a number of people in this game, the creation community of this game, that fundamentally don't believe that. Or if they believe it, their actions don't follow up on it. And I have a problem with that.
I think so. I agree with you. I always believe, and I'm not perfect. I say things and I go, oh shit, I have to get better. But I always believe, like, hey, when I say something, is there a reason for what I'm saying? Am I saying something just to be mean to someone, or am I saying something, maybe it is mean, but it does have to be said, and or am I saying something that's going to build somebody up? And I had somebody notice on Reddit recently, they had said to me, you've really grown in the last like year or two. And my response was basically, if you're not every day trying to grow a little bit from something you did yesterday, then like, what's the point? Like try and make the mistakes and admit that you fucked up somewhere, but build off of it and do better. But kind of going back to that whole content creator thing, I had a very short conversation with Arnold like 2, maybe 3 years ago somewhere. And he had told me when I had messaged him and kind of talked to him, he's like, I really hate when people call me an influencer. And after that day, I really try, and I'm very cognizant, even though the only posts of mine he reads are the math that he puts on his streams, is I really try to be cognizant not to call him an influencer, just because it comes down to that fact of what's the purpose of saying that, like, versus saying content creator or entertainer. There is no purpose of me saying influencer, because it negatively affects him, and it doesn't positively affect anybody else. It's a net zero. It's a net negative.
So it's a fair point. What I want to come back to is this idea that two things can be true.
Of course.
He may not want to be called an influencer. He may not view himself as an influencer. But if he is.
He is, of course.
That's the, and that's a, and I don't, this is where it gets a little delicate to have this conversation, because you piss off like the Swifties type thing here.
I want to pause you just for a second, because I'll forget.
Yeah.
You had said something in H&N. My wife, when we were driving home yesterday, we were listening to Sabrina Carpenter, and I was mentioning the fact that you called her Walmart Taylor Swift. My wife had said, she's like, that's really mean. And I tried to explain to her, I was like, no, that's not what he meant. Like it had to do with whatever. Yeah, but yeah. I had to make a point to work that in to some point let you know.
Yeah, it's not it's a knock. It was a comment on the difference in ticket prices between the two. I think is the way to look at it. And look, this is not intended. I don't want this to be criticism of Arnold, because I think you can say this about a number of different places. When you have a voice, you have to be conscious of what you're saying. This goes back to a conversation you and I had, where I have been very critical of a pretty frequent commenter on Reddit, that I told you once that I feel like some of these Reddit posters need to have their name and face put out in the world to see whether that changes what they do. I mean, I've talked about this on H&M before. My daughter and her class last year were supposed to look up their parents on the internet, and what came up was not my name. What came up was a bunch of content around Pico Burrito.
Yeah.
So I have to be very conscious of understanding of what I'm saying out there. Now, there's also a piece of me that just fundamentally, I am not going to be someone who is going to say that the developers are stupid and they're incompetent. Like that's not who I am from that standpoint, because I understand, one, influencer, content, whatever you want to call that. The second that you are putting an opinion out there and you're talking about these things at this level, you have to be cognizant of the fact that what you say has an impact on other people.
Absolutely.
Right? And I'll go back to, look, I am not perfect about this. And I will, Calvin Austin, I heard him say something once on the Gambit, the big 4-hour Gambit show, and I massively disagreed with it. And I don't remember if he posted something in the HNN Discord, or I kind of like made a subtweet comment underneath it, and he responded. Basically, it was like, I didn't call him out, but it was clear if you knew the conversation, I was targeting what he said, and he caught it. And he kind of made a comment back to me, and I reached out to him and I said, Calvin, first of all, I am sorry. That was cheap. That was easy. I shouldn't have done it. And then I went back out into the server and said, hey, I said this thing. I shouldn't have done it. It was kind of crappy. So I'm not perfect by any means whatsoever. People do that. But I think that the understanding of what we're doing, and understanding that if you have a platform, your ability to monitor, to modify the tone of anything is amplified 1,000 times. And I just wish some of the people that actually built some content around this actually realize that, especially the folks that are more willing to share opinions than they are do a video about how, I don't know, how to beat great mothers or something
Yeah.
similar from that side.
And I don't disagree with you. I think my only point is for him, when I say like influencer, he does influence the community. But it doesn't preclude me from, instead of calling him an influencer, saying, calling him a content creator, or saying he is a content creator that does influence the community. Because just like saying, hey, Pico Burrito is a whale. Whereas I can just say, hey, Pico Burrito spends his money because that's where he wants to spend his money. I don't want to bring up the specific situation because I don't want to call out this person, but I have in the past said this person did this thing knowing that they have a large following, and it was irresponsible. It was irresponsible because it caused a lot of people to do something that just wasn't, they could have if they wanted to on their own, but it just wasn't the right thing to push people to do. In a game like this, and I agree with that, and it's something that I try to be aware of, and we've had I think a fundamental but friendly disagreement on the example of like the Padawan Obi-Wan Omicron, where I did a whole video on like why it's not worth it, and I'm not saying that you are super pro everybody do it, but for you made the case like it does save me time, it does do this, it does help me, where you just have to be careful what you're saying because people are going to, they value that opinion.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually that's a great example of how to handle these types of conversations. You put something out, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I'm like, I think it does, blah, blah, blah. At no point in those two statements, and particularly on your side, because I think it's typically when it's more so on the I don't think this is a good idea.
Yeah.
You never refer to the developers as stupid, as trying to pull one across. It never became an attack at the developers, the decisions that they made from that. And it's back to I had a boss years ago tell me after a particularly poor case of I was going to get somebody in a conversation. He pulled me aside and said, "You're allowed to be critical. You're not allowed to be cruel."
Yeah.
And I think that's the line that I think that people that have these platforms need to be better at. You can be critical, but calling someone incompetent, or what did I hear the other day, that someone was still taking shots at CG over the statement that Jedi Knight Luke was not going to be paired with Jedi Knight Revan. I'm like, God, that was 7 years ago, or like 5 years, however long ago. Like, just let it go.
The game changes.
Like, let it go. Things they were wrong. I mean, God forbid, how would anyone else love to have everything that they've said point out that they're wrong? I mean, I have a 2-year recording history with Sarah. Please, someone go through and tell me that I'm wrong all the time and watch me not give a shit.
Yeah.
But there's no point of doing that over and over. And I think that we collectively, and I have to say we because, well, actually I don't have to say we anymore because I'm not a content creator anymore. I can say you guys. We need to do a better job of being critical and not cruel.
Yes. And I will say, if you look at some of my original creator posts, before I even realized that I was being taken seriously, like right in the beginning, I look at some of the names of those posts, and one of them, which still is funny to me, but would never be something that I would post now, was something along the lines of Conquest 7 is that Triceratops shit from Jurassic Park. And it's hilarious to me, but I also, I would never do that again, because now in the last 2 years, knowing that people do take my opinion seriously, I try to, even the things that I don't like, I say, hey, here's the facts. Here's how I see it. But, make up your own mind. They're the facts, you do your own whatever. But I'm not gonna say, nobody should do this or you're a fucking moron. I am gonna just say, there's the data. Go at it. Do what you want with it.
So my first, in the function of my job, my first presentation about one of our products in front of an audience that I did not know. There's about 20 people in the room. And part of our without getting all the details, part of it was the ability to restrict access to certain pieces of internet content was part of it. And I made the comment that, like, let's say, as an example, Bob's spending too much time looking at pictures of kitties on the internet. You can prevent that. And as I started to swing back to look at the slide to make sure where I was, I watched someone do a double take. And in the back of my head, I heard, oh, that sounded too much like kitties because I talk fast. So I swung back around and said to this audience, like, I would like to officially state for the record that that was kitties with 2 T's and not kitties with 2 D's. Half the room was laughing out of control. The other half was looking at me confusing. And since that point, I have been chasing that feeling forever because, again, it was a cheap joke.
Yeah.
But that laugh mattered. And to your point, like when you talk about, this is the hard part when, like that line you made, like the Jurassic Park, like that was really funny. And it's hard not to keep chasing it. Like it is dopamine at that point. It's hard sometimes to pull back and do that, which is, again, why like I have all of these secret, 2 or 3 person Discord pieces where I can actually go make those comments back to someone else. And it actually doesn't become, a broader side from that piece. But I get it. And again, I'm not awesome at this. I every day I try to get a little bit better. But
that's the whole thing. It's growth, and I think that some people are allergic to growth, and if anyone takes anything out of this, is just it becomes do better, grow every day. Look back at your mistakes, look back at what you've done in the past, and don't perseverate on it and be like, man, I was a real piece of shit. But just say, all right, I made that mistake and move on, and if people follow what I've done throughout time, hopefully they see that and they see like the post titles have changed from like movie references that are cheap shots at CG to this is almost like the government is posting as me because they're not interesting titles. They're pre-data of this thing, blah blah blah, sector 1, blah blah blah, and you read it and you're like, somebody actually said to me recently, does ChatGPT write your stuff? It's like, no, I just am very measured on purpose. And that is, I still inject my humor. I still inject who I am, but I'm just cognizant of the fact that I don't want to be mean for the sake of being mean.
Yeah. Well, and to pull it back, it's the Bo Burnham growth.
Yes.
Started with it's that you did what worked over there, and over time you just become a different person.
Yes. It's same thing. Before Bo Burnham, it was Sarah Silverman. Like 10 years before him, it was the same exact shit. And now you look at her and you go, "What? Like she's a really smart person that a lot of people didn't give a chance because." And actually, it goes back to the whole the gender thing where people just said, "Oh, she's a female comic. She's talking about female comic things." Like, no, she's talking about her experience, and it's no different than dick jokes. It's the same thing. It's the same cheap humor. We're just looking at it in a different light.
Do you know what has always bothered me about Sarah Silverman? Her disproportionately long neck. Like I've noticed it once, and I can't ever not look at it. And it's just, again, it's weird. It's weird. It's
now the
really
next
funny,
time,
but also
the next time I see her in something, I'm gonna think of that and be like, oh fuck, like I'm never gonna not be able to unsee it. Yeah. I'm gonna be at the movies. I'm gonna whisper to my wife, I have to go to the bathroom, and I'm gonna be texting you, be like, you piece of shit, like I cannot unsee this. With that said, I want to finish up just because, again, my wife will kill me. And I've already taken up more of your time than I intended to, and I did the same thing with Sarah when we first started this, and I said 20 minutes, and it became an hour, and everybody else, I was like, hey, this is probably going to be my longest one, because I literally will just keep talking. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you, for dealing with me over the last almost a year. I am going to put this record out there twofold. One, I would watch, and I know that there are other people who would watch and have said to me, you and Sarah do something that has nothing to do with this game. And I agree with her husband, and I think maybe your wife, but definitely her husband, that you have to continue to do just something for the sake of that. But I will let it be known to everybody else that I have said this to you privately. If you are ever interested, you're one of the very, very, very few people that I would be interested in doing something with on a more regular basis, just because I think that you are somebody that isn't fuck CG or like yay CG, and it's like, I have an opinion that can be both. So I'm putting that out there. But I'm going to leave you with the last words before we finish the recording.
So, first of all, thank you for that. And as I told you the other day, I need a little bit of time to kind of step away from that and draw a line, from the other piece. Again, I will never say never, because that's the fastest way to proving yourself wrong is where that sits. But look, man, I've greatly appreciated this. I love having conversations with smart people, and it's clear through some of the Discord conversations, listening to you other places, you're a really smart individual. But more importantly, you can have a conversation, but not draw a line in the sand. And I think that's an important distinction. So I really appreciate this. Anytime you want me to come back, I'm happy to. The best part is when you have kids my age, they're not even out of bed yet. It's almost 11 o'clock in the morning. So it's, that's not going to happen. I know you're going out there to root on your Broncos against the Jets today. But just keep an eye on Garrett Wilson. Again, graduate of the Ohio State University. I'm an Ohio State Buckeye. It's my school. Garrett's a stud. If you meet him, tell him I said hi. He has no idea who I am, but I would just prefer if you would do that anyway.
If I do, I will. But we're in the nosebleeds, so the chances of that are very low. But if I do, I'll say, hey, there's this guy on the internet, Pico Burrito. You don't know him.
He lives in Columbus. You probably, again, have never met him. But no, I really appreciate this. I had a blast. And I thank you. Yeah,
so with that said, guys, I hope whoever listened to 2 hours, which great for you guys. I hope you got something out of this, and I'll leave you with, peace out.